Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition. Feel the force.
Since I was a high school student, I've watched the escalation of the war on drugs, especially marijuana. I slowly became aware of its widespread use. As a freshman legislator in Oregon 40 years ago, my opinion was set by a hog farmer from eastern Oregon who was a state representative named Stafford Hansel. Stafford held the Oregon House, and the people crowded into the gallery spellbound with his tutorial on marijuana and its comparison to other addictive substances, both legal and illegal. This older gentleman, who didn't smoke, didn't drink alcohol, let alone use marijuana, made his case. He pointed out how tobacco was highly addictive and killed hundreds of thousands of Americans per year. He discussed alcohol, whose damaging properties had once led the country into a foolish, costly, and ultimately self-defeating experiment with prohibition. Alcohol use was damaging for some, led to dependency for many, while contributing to tens of thousands of highway deaths every year and serious health problems for countless others. By the time Representative Hansel got to marijuana, he'd convinced me that the bill he was advocating, two-plant legalization, was not just worthy of my support, which I was already inclined to do, but something that I should advocate, that Oregonians should be allowed this choice, less damaging and addicting than tobacco. We didn't legalize marijuana in 1973, although I was assured that if the 22 of us who had voted for the bill had been supported by the people who used it but voted no, the measure would have passed easily. We did make Oregon the first state to decriminalize the use of marijuana. Possession of a small amount was made a minor infraction, treated like a traffic ticket. Today, 40 years later, the case is even more compelling. 14 states have now decriminalized policies like Oregon passed in 1973. In 1996, California pioneered the legal use of medical marijuana, whose therapeutic qualities have long been known and employed. And since then, 18 states and the District of Columbia have approved medical marijuana initiatives, allowing its use to relieve chronic pain, nausea, and other conditions. Notably, 2/3 of these approvals were a result of voter initiatives. Last fall, voters in Colorado and Washington approved adult recreational use with 55% approval margins. Studies show that a majority of Americans now agree that marijuana should be legalized. It is time that the federal government revisit its policies. Drugs with less serious classifications like methamphetamine and cocaine have more serious law enforcement, health, and behavioral impacts, yet marijuana retains its Schedule I classification. In 2011, 2/3 of a million people were arrested for using a substance that millions use, many more have tried, and a majority of Americans feel should be legal. Because there are stark racial differences in enforcement and incarceration, there are wide disparities in the legal treatment for communities of color versus their white counterpart. Medical marijuana is widely accepted but subject to inherent conflict with federal law that is unfair, confusing, and costly. A bipartisan group of legislators is developing a comprehensive package of legislation to clarify and reform outdated, ineffective, and unwise federal policies. In a time of great fiscal stress and a sea change in opinion of voters, this is a unique opportunity to save money on enforcement and incarceration, avoid unnecessary conflict and harsh treatment of users, provide a framework for medical marijuana, and even reduce the deficit, all by honoring the wish of 2/3 of Americans to respect states' rights for marijuana, just like we do for alcohol. I would invite my colleagues to join this effort in developing a marijuana policy that makes sense for America today.
An Oregon congressman says the federal government needs to get its act together on its marijuana policy. He made that case on the House floor. News Channel 8's Tim Gordon is live for us in downtown Portland with Earl Blumenauer's proposal.
Reggie, the congressman wants to legalize marijuana use and regulate it much like alcohol and tobacco. Blumenauer took to the House floor with two pieces of legislation today to end the federal prohibition on marijuana and to create a framework for taxing it. The congressman says a majority of Americans now believe pot should be legalized and that a vast majority think the federal government should let states enforce their own marijuana laws, whether they allow medical or recreational use.
This is a unique opportunity to save money on enforcement and incarceration, avoid unnecessary conflict and harsh treatment of users.
I mean, there's an effect on the human brain. We're really concerned mostly about the effect on teens and young people.
The plan has its critics, and it is unclear how much support Blumenauer's bill has, but many states have decriminalized pot. 19, including Oregon, allow medical marijuana use, and Colorado and Washington state, of course, voters just said yes to recreational use last November. Now, Blumenauer, for his part, says however it happens, he predicts that marijuana will be legal across the country in the next 10 to 15 years. We'll keep you posted. And back to you.
Interesting. Tim Gordon, thank you. The congressman's plan to legalize and tax marijuana is generating a debate right now on our Facebook page. We'd like to have your opinion. Please join us. Just search for KGW Television. We'll have some of your comments at the end of the show. Feedback on a story we did earlier in the newscast. Oregon Congressman Earl Blumenauer made his proposal in the U.S. House today to legalize and tax marijuana nationally. Our Tim Gordon will be live again with the specifics in just a few minutes.
We asked if you thought it was a good idea, and Ginger says, has everyone lost their minds? Legalize it just for the taxes? What's next? Cocaine?
Sam tells us, yeah, legalize pot with a 50% tax and then watch the black market grow bigger.
Desiree says, I say go for it. I don't touch the stuff, but I do recognize that would create less petty criminals in our jails.
Anna tells us, I love the idea, but 50%? What is the tax percentage on tobacco and alcohol? Marijuana should not be any more than those two highly addictive drugs are. Thanks for your opinions, and thanks for watching.
We want to let everybody know that we're law-abiding citizens and that we respect the law. So let's
relax it and tax it. Medical marijuana gotta have it. Relax it and tax it. Righteousness, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious. Legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. Legalize it. I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I smoke pot and I like it a lot. Repeat it. I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I smoke pot and I like it a lot. Marijuana, marijuana. diesel? Do you want your fuel dollar going in the pocket of an Arab sheik or an American farmer? Which would you rather see your money to? How many American boys have died for fuel that we... Give me weed or give me death!
Y'all a little bit about a plant I know that can save the world. It grows long and tall and has flowers that can make your mind swirl. It's a funky plant with a fiber that is resistant to rain and mold. It's the strongest plant fiber known to man, the best rope you'll ever hold. Well, the pioneers covered up the wagon trains with a canvas made of hemp. In Washington and Jefferson, they grew it on their farms and said to make the most of it. The first stars and stripes were sewn on hemp, the first Constitution too. It's used around the world for food, fiber, oil, medicine, and fuel. And if the president sleeps, we won't have no need for any of the oil. We can make paints and inks, or run our cars going back next season. It'll fix the soil, the most nutritious seed we can put in our mouth with omega-6 and 3. We can feed the world with the tree of life and live sustainably. But if we cut down all the trees, we won't have nowhere to breathe. We'll grow fields and hemp instead. We can make our paper, build a house from it. Got us plant, grow wild and free, living the way that we ought to be. Gonna leave my children a better world than my ancestors left me. Whoa, whoa. La 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 la. Whoa, whoa. Hemp plant make the best medicines on earth. Helps cancer and AIDS patients eat their food. Helps those with depression overcome the blues. Glaucoma, epilepsy, nausea, insomnia, stress, neurosis, psychosis, pain, PMS. All the studies have been done and all the doctors agree, but they can't make money off this plant, you see, because it's free. It grows from a seed, a wild and free life we ought to be. You know the future is grown in our own backyards. But if we cut down all the trees, we won't have nowhere to breathe. We'll grow fields and hemp instead. We can make our bed, we'll build a house from it. So gotta spend, go wild and free, living the way that we ought to be. Gonna leave my children a better world than my ancestors left me. Whoa, whoa. La 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 la. Whoa, whoa. Modern day and age, when we seem to lack spirituality, this one single plant can bring us back 10,000 years in history. To the Shiva Puranas, the Jesus, the Christ, to the Buddha, the pagans, the goddess, the light, to commune with all the animals, to roam with all the trees, to realize the goddess seek is inside me. As the earth is a mother, we gotta take care of the earth. The earth is the mother that gives life birth, and we can hear our listen with a single green plant. We can start right now. But if we cut down all the trees, we won't have nowhere to breathe. We'll grow fields and nothing's there. We can't make our papers on the house from here. So gotta spend, go wild and free, living the way that we ought to be. Gonna leave my children a better world than my ancestors left me. Whoa, whoa. La 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 la. Whoa, whoa.
Coffee shop culture and their coffee shop industry. Also, there's this concern all over Europe that you don't want to have drug tourism. People from more regressive countries take on the train for 2 hours to get to the Netherlands, they buy up all their pot, and then they go home. Well, that's not, Germany doesn't like that. Germany says marijuana is illegal, and people go over to across the border to the Netherlands, pick it up and go home. Consequently, the coffee shops with the biggest turnover are the ones right along the border. And those are the ones that are having to have cards where you have to be a local citizen to go there and be a customer. You'll hear that they're rolling them back in the Netherlands. It's you know, you always hear the news when they roll it back, and then in practice it sort of lives on. And I don't know exactly what the latest is, but it's a, you know, it's a constant struggle over there because there's a lot of forces that are sort of you know, threatened by their progressive attitude about this. I was talking about the complexity of what happens after you do legalize marijuana. Roger Goodman, you know him probably, he's a local congressman, or he's running for Congress for Jameson Spots. Cool guy, by the way. Very courageous, and he's been speaking out in a very viable, thoughtful, easy to embrace from a general public point of view, drug policy points, and Roger's just a beautiful guy. Years ago, he put on a 3-day seminar with the Seattle Bar Association. Well, the whole theme of the convention was, let's assume marijuana is legal. Now what do we do? You know, how do you wholesale it? How do you advertise it? How do you regulate it? Nobody's figured this out. The Netherlands have been doing this for 25 years. They decided to quasi-legalize it, but the wholesale end of it is still wink, wink, nudge, nudge. All right? It's called the gray area. The gray area. It's just, I was talking to these guys, and you know, they've got their laws. For instance, if you're an American here, you're worried about, if they legalize marijuana, they're going to be having big billboards advertising it to my children, right across the street from school. These are the issues we should be dealing with here. You know, when we think of practicality, where are we going to go with this? Well, in the Netherlands, they have dealt with this, and you cannot advertise marijuana. You cannot. You step into a coffee shop, and this is what I do in my work. I go in as a clueless tourist, and I figure out I'm confused. What do I do? And I have to learn, and then I write it down so people with my guidebooks can learn from my experience there. You go into a coffee shop, if you've never been in one before, you're first struck by, I want to spend some money, but I don't know what to buy. Where's the menu? Because they can't advertise it. It can't come at you. It can't be like on a restaurant where they post it on the door. So the guy says, if you want to know what's for sale, you got to push this button. So you push this button, and a thing lights up. And you are physically illuminating the menu. The point is, it seems like legal hair splitting, but the point is, the information doesn't come to you. The consumer goes to the information. Now, that seems a little wacky, maybe, but that's dealing with a very real and legitimate concern of the general populace that wouldn't think this is a fun party. All right? They don't want people promoting pot to their kids. And I can live with that, you know. They've got an issue of they don't want people buying a lot and then going and selling it. They want it pretty much just small time, so they limit you to a couple of, just a small amount per day. Very strict limit of people only over 18 that can go into these coffee shops. Definitely no hard drugs. The police see it as a firewall. The police like this because they know where the drug experimenting population goes, and the police are concerned about hard drug abuse, not soft drug use. And the police even have bulletin boards in these coffee shops so they can communicate what's dangerous on the streets in the way of chemical drugs. So, you know, that's a surprise to think police would find a coffee shop as a very handy tool for pragmatic harm reduction drug issues, you see. That's real drug policy, rather than this just say, no, marijuana's going to kill you. In a coffee shop in Amsterdam, there is a limit of 500 grams that they can have in their inventory at any time. That's about a pound. They can keep a pound of marijuana in their shop. The mayor of Amsterdam, last time I was there, was advocating to double that limit to 1 kilo because it would cut down on traffic congestion because there were so many little petty deliveries going around all over town. You could gross a ton of marijuana, but you can never have more than 500 grams in stock at any one time, you see? So I just find all of these little backside issues just so fun when you think about how progressive Europeans are and how creative they are and how unfearful they are, how pragmatic they are. You know, when I was first going to the Netherlands, you were getting an opportunity to buy pot from Morocco or Pakistan or wherever. Now it's all grown right there in the Netherlands. They've got the technology to grow the equivalent of Pakistan or whatever you liked about, you know, Morocco or something like that right there. And it's too dangerous and complicated for them to import it. They don't need to import it anymore. It's locally grown. There's just, all of these things just blossom when you get down to real pragmatic issues rather than throwing around bumper stickers. The children at risk thing is a major concern for Europeans as well as Americans. Dutch cops know that in the United States, it's easier for kids to get their hands on marijuana than it is to get their hands on alcohol because, as anybody in this game knows, the best way to lose control of something is to make it illegal. If you want to make it tough for kids to get, you regulate it. You just regulate it. It's such a clear, logical sort of thing that the average fearful voter in the suburbs needs to learn, and that's who we need to talk with. When you think about the fear in our society, we can look at Europe and see how they've handled it. 10 years ago in Portugal, they decided to legalize the consumption of all drugs. All drugs. And I just interviewed their drug czar who wrote that law for my radio show, and you can see it on my website if you ever want to hear it. But they said after 10 years now, they have done a review of the effectiveness, because it was a little scary, you know, to legalize the consumption of all drugs. And they decided after 10 years, even people who were opposed to it, that use has not gone up. They took the crime out of the equation, and now they can deal with it in a smart, pragmatic, harm reduction kind of way. Pretty good. What they've done is they've made marijuana boring. It's no longer quite so sexy, you know, and it's just there for people who want it. It's really quite amazing. Now, a lot of Americans think there's a whole reservoir of people out there that would just love to ruin their lives by smoking pot if only it was legal. These people are clueless. Anybody who wants to smoke pot, I think, does.
Right.
And they just have to be criminals to do it. And I'm convinced if you legalize marijuana tomorrow in Washington State, use might spike a little bit, it would settle back down to about where it is today, and it would just be a non-issue. That's what it is in Europe, a non-issue. There's no clear rule book. Nobody knows exactly how to do it. By my little anecdotal case studies in Europe, every country has a different approach to it. In Spain, you will see marijuana leaves all over that are just advertising little shops. They just look like little knick-knack shops. So there are little garden shops, and these are grow-your-own shops. And in Spain, you can't sell marijuana, but you can grow it for your own use. So there's no retail sale of marijuana, but there is sale of all the gear you need to grow it well and seeds. So next time you go to Spain, you'll see that, and you'll have to hang around long enough to grow it in order to take advantage of that. Okay. Now, is that better than the Netherlands or the Portuguese approach? Well, they're all better than what we got, aren't they? There's no perfect solution. So you're going to hear people complaining about 502. We need to take a step forward. We need to take it out of the lock up 800,000 people, or arrest 800,000 people a year zone, and then we can figure out where to go from there. But I really believe, even with all of its flaws, if 502 passes, it becomes less scary for the people that need to have the fear taken out of this. And from there, we can get to a very reasonable arrangement like they have in Europe. At least that's my hope. I'll tell you just a few of the ideas that came from my talk with the main drug guy in the Seattle Police Force before he went to be the police chief of another city. His mission is to protect kids and stop violence and to enforce existing laws. They don't have strong feelings about marijuana. It's sort of, I would imagine, it's sort of a drag to have to even worry about this, but they have to enforce laws. They're worried about protecting kids and stopping violence. They don't evaluate the laws. For them, they don't differentiate between different kinds of drugs. It's just when they see problems, there's drugs. There's hard drugs, there's marijuana, there's alcohol. It's just problems. Alcohol or drugs equals problems. They're sort of insulted by medical marijuana because of the sham aspect of medical marijuana. And it is, if I was a police officer, I would sort of be insulted by it too. Not to legitimize the whole validity of medical marijuana, but the fact is, people go in to get their clinic card, not claiming glaucoma, because that can be checked, but they say they got a sore neck, and that really can't be verified. Whenever you use that word harm reduction, that's a catchphrase for legalization. I hope that's going to change in the near future. One problem they have with our whole discussion is that they don't believe in any of our numbers, and it's hard to get straight numbers anywhere. If you look on the internet, who made these numbers up, you know, the right or the left, it's just a frustrating thing. I wish we could get more numbers. If you want to be credible, I think it's important that we acknowledge explicitly that children need to be protected from marijuana. We need to acknowledge that it's not healthy, it can be abused, and it can be addictive. I don't even know if it can be addictive. I guess it can be psychologically addictive. I know people that have smoked every day for 20 years and then they just decide to stop and it's no problem. Other people, they got weaker character, I guess, and they just become psychologically addicted, or maybe it's physically addicted. Whatever the case, throw them that bone. Admit it can be addictive. It's not healthy. It's a drug. It can be abused. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm saying it should not be a crime. Now, I've been speaking out on this for a long time, and I'll tell you, we've made a lot of progress. If you feel frustrated, we've made a lot of progress. When I came out, I mean, I spoke on Jim French's show. I don't know if you old-time Seattleites know Jim French. He was a great radio guy back in the 80s and 70s and 80s, and I had to go as an anonymous responsible user back then. But it's so nice to not have to be so anonymous. But 10 years or so ago when I joined Normal and first spoke out, I just felt like, man, I was like some sort of a child molester or something. People pushed me down in the chair and there's all these cameras on me, and it was scary. Now, it's not scary at all. I was standing on main stage yesterday with the mayor of Seattle. I mean, that is really cool. Every one of our representatives is hip to this. I mean, the people we've got on board for 502, it's just inconceivable 5 years ago. Like Roger Goodman has learned, you cannot assassinate somebody's character politically now because they're smart on drugs. Roger Goodman's opponents try to. They spend good money trying to make him seem soft on drugs to his electorate, and every time his opponents try to assassinate his character because of his stand on marijuana, Roger's numbers spike upward, all right? That's a new age, I'll tell you. That is a new age, and we got to be smart to capitalize on that. I think it's a little frustrating for me to come to HempFest because I get a sense that 90% of the people here, you know, they just are not doing anything to push it forward in a smart way. It's a beautiful festival. Vivian taught me that in a very nice way that this is a celebration for a legitimate part of our society to come out and be who they are in public. And that in itself is really something to celebrate. You know? I mean, it's not my crowd, but I just love that we can do this. But what I'm concerned about is how these laws are messing up people. And we owe it to, if we're good citizens, we owe it to each other to get out there now and you know, clean up our act and use this word in polite company. People freak out when they hear the word marijuana. Talk about it in a smart, compassionate, knowledgeable way. Share it with community leaders. I took my pastor for a walk and told him I'm going to be speaking out from now on out about marijuana, and I want you to know why. And he bought it. The Church Council of Seattle is with us.
Yeah.
You know, they are with us. Yeah. Teachers are with us. Teachers can't talk because they're afraid of losing their job or their option for a raise or something like that, but they're with us. Politicians are with us. The media is with us when the mic is off. I've been on with the mic, you know, all over the country, and people are asking me all these straight, nervous questions. As soon as the mic's off, they say, thank you for speaking out. You know, we need to speak out. We need to speak out in a way that does not scare people. Some people say, well, what about your business? You know, I employ 80 people up in Edmonds. What's this going to matter to your business? Well, frankly, I'm not worried about my business. I'm worried about the truth. If it hurt my business, I'd do the same thing. But the fun news is, I think it's actually pretty good for my business. I'm the only business in Seattle that's not selling Doritos or rolling papers that's got a banner up on the main stage, I think. You know, and it's a breakthrough. This is a real market here if you're just looking for an advertising in. But, you know, I get a lot of people that read about what I think about marijuana. They say, I know what you think about pot, and we're not going to use your guidebooks anymore, and we're not going to take any of your Europe tours. And all I can think is Europe's going to be more fun without you, all right? I really think the public is ahead of the politicians on this, and the politicians are learning. And I actually think the politicians are ahead of the corporations. I think the corporations are really the scared ones. And I think the corporations are really, in so many ways, they're pissing me off these days, you know? This is one area where they act like they're moralistic, but they're just reading the tea leaves and what's good for their business. Google Michael Phelps, is that his name? And who was his Kellogg's or something like that? You know, he was caught smoking marijuana. He was a poster boy for, was it Kellogg's?
Yes.
Yeah, and then so Kellogg's was going to say, you know, get rid of him, and all their stock values died when they got rid of Michael Phelps. So what was it then? Subway Sandwich was also supporting Michael Phelps. They were going to get rid of him too. They had a board meeting, and they looked at what happened to Kellogg's when they got rid of Michael Phelps, and then Subway thought, we better keep him on board. In fact, they came out with an advertising campaign immediately after that called "Have a Subway Sandwich and Feel the Buzz." Check it out. Check it out. I mean, it's just amazing. But it just clarified my hunch that they're only moralistic, not because they're moral, but because they're looking to profit maximize. And we can change that so corporations won't be so threatened by profit maximization. I walk a fine line in my work with my underwriting and all this kind of thing, and I'm very careful not to be pro-drugs. I mean, I'm a harm reduction, civil liberties kind of approach to this, and I think that's our best approach when we're going out in the public. But we've got to remember, our politicians, as soon as they feel like it's safe, they'll raise their voices. But right now, it's one of those third rail issues. So my advice to you, if you're going to be speaking out on this, please understand we've got to get out of the choir. I mean, I love to talk on main stage, but I'd much rather talk at a Rotary Club. I'd rather talk to 200 Rotarians. I mean, I'd rather talk to a couple thousand people here. That's more fun. But I'm going to get more accomplished if I go to a Rotary Club. You know, you can do that. You know, half the people here, they put on a suit the next day and go to work. You know, you can take it there. We don't need to be in the closet. You can't believe the fun I've had speaking out on this all over the country. I got the Lutheran of the Year Award, the Wittenberg Award in Washington, D.C., and they introduced me as a board member of NORML. That wouldn't happen a long time ago, but now people know in their hearts of hearts that you can be smart on marijuana policy, and that means taking the crime out of this thing.
Right on.
So, I'm just going to wrap up here in a sec. Don't be scary. This is one of my themes. All my friends on NORML, we try not to be scary. You know, we're out there in the public. You don't want to be scary. Look at some of your friends. They're just flat out scary. Not to you and me, but to the person that needs to vote for this. They're scary. I'm not saying it's right. The reality is they're scary. So take the scary out of it. Get involved in other things so that when you're involved in something like really nice and compassionate drug policy. It confuses people. You know, they want to like you, they want to support you, they respect you, and then they see what you're into here also, and they give you more time. They give you more credibility, and I find that works really well. Preempt attacks. I'm telling you, they're worried about kids, they're worried about driving, and they're worried about hard drugs. You can preempt that. The only thing gateway about marijuana is its illegality. That's what the Europeans have learned. I mean, as soon as it's illegal, the only way you can get it, I mean, the way most people get it is from some criminal on the street who is interested in getting you hooked on something more addictive and more profitable. We can talk about that. And then just be straight and honest about you believe the responsible adult use of marijuana in a recreational way is a civil liberty. I always like to say I'm a hard-working, tax-paying, kid-raising, church-going citizen of this country, and if I work hard all day long, want to go home and relax with a joint, that is my civil liberty.
Yes, sir.
So, one of my favorite things I've heard all in the last couple of years is when our friend John McKay, you know, the prosecuting attorney, former prosecuting attorney, when he stood on a stage with us in the ACLU thing here and he said, he's a Republican. I mean, he's just a hard law and order kind of guy. He said, this marijuana law that we're living with is flat out bad law. We got that going in our favor. It's bad law. Mayor LaGuardia said back in the 30s when they're dealing with stupid alcohol laws, he said, if a society has a law in the book that it does not intend to enforce consistently across the board, the very existence of that law erodes respect for law enforcement in general. That's a big problem in a society, and we got that going on right now with this war on marijuana. I want to remind you once more, we have a window. You'll hear other people talking about it. It's an election year next year, and I understand only during a presidential election do kids get out and vote in numbers enough to make our initiatives viable. I know there's I'm a co-sponsor of 502, and I'm really sad that we can't have this grow it at home provision, you know? That's just something I'm going to live with. I know other people in the medical community have their concerns and the whole driving thing, but these laws evolve. And my main concern is to get over the summit so that people out there will see they made a law that legalized and regulated and taxed marijuana, and you know, it's no big deal. Consumption didn't go up, crime went out, and now we can get along with normalizing this thing. It's a tough challenge to get 240,000 signatures. If you want to do something, and you can just write a huge check and you're rich, do that, and they'll hire other people to get those signatures. But I think it is really good citizenship, and it's good hempmanship, if you go over to that booth, 502, check out one of those little clipboards, go home, go to your workplace, let people you know this is smart law, this is good citizenship, this is how we're going to end the war on marijuana, and then, decades from now, we can tell our grandchildren that Washington State was the first state that started the end of the prohibition on marijuana. That is an exciting opportunity. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. I hope that we can enjoy the rest of HempFest. Happy travels, even if you're just staying home, okay? Thank you very much.
In between the blues, there are good days and bad days, with everything and nothing to lose. While the setting sun never sits, and the night has no limits. The void between freedom and free, dealing with the unnatural reality. A need to see, a need to be. Grass fire, my DNA needs THC.
Grass fire in a world that yearns. That's the way this fire burns. Like a grass fire.
In the unnatural society, been trying to maintain, while the sane appear to be clearly insane, with no way to explain. Outlasting the great lie, a sparking spark does my mind. Grass fire, pulling the sky, breathing in sativa's design.
Grass fire in a world that yearns. That's the way this fire burns. It's a grass fire.
The void between freedom and free, dealing with the unnatural reality. A need to see, a need to be. Grass fire, my DNA needs THC. Dreaming of long times past, all that those times brought. Looking to the heart of tomorrow. Grass fire in a world that yearns. That's the way this fire burns.
The White House put out a statement that there's no medical value for marijuana, but yet we know from studies and from the work of Patients at a Time, things that you've unearthed and do, that that's not true. We know from Elvie Masaki, who's getting her medication from the government, that they realize that there is some truth to what we say. So how do we take a bright mind like Obama and the White House administration and make them realize publicly that there is a medical value to this plant?
What they always resort back to is the lack of peer-reviewed studies, where there are literally, I've got about 10,000 peer-reviewed studies on my computer dealing with cannabis. But what they, for the most part, they're not dealing with smoked marijuana, other than early studies from the 70s. But there are a few, and more coming out now, dealing with smoked or with extracts. And one just came out last week from Germany, basically challenging the whole idea of what the federal government is doing, because there is documented medical value. I think the only thing that really makes politicians listen is when their constituency contacts them directly, phone, email, more importantly, sometimes postcards, and then they start to see, or visiting them. That's what they start to listen to when they realize that their positions are in jeopardy if they don't follow the correct, direction, really. And I think that that's starting to happen more and more, because having spent too much time this summer in Washington, D.C., I now understand much more of how the game is played. And if we can all learn how to play the game better, then we're going to have a magnified impact on changing things quicker and easier. So I think it's up to the voice of the people to make it happen.
Further ado, Dr. John P. Morgan.
Thank you. It's, that didn't make it go off. Oh, okay, it did. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, a real pleasure, despite the fact that none of the talks are related much one to another, but it's still a pleasure. My title is Plants, Medicine, and Drugs. Human therapy begins, historically and other ways, with the consumption of herbal agricultural products. We search for plants as drugs, as we search for plants as foods. Somehow, somewhere, humans found it positive to ingest preparations from the cola nut, the ephedra species, the cocoa bush, cannabis, opium, tobacco, foxglove, and even willow bark. Now, pharmacology, the formal study of therapy, begins with the study and understanding of the chemistry of the plant preparations that we've talked about, and the reaction of those plant preparations with biological tissue, with human cells in the human body. I'm going to, at this point, rapidly skip over approximately 1,000 years and tell you that the plants yield chemicals. The chemicals bind to substructures on human cells, which pharmacologists have come to call receptors. We have receptors in our body. No reason we shouldn't respond to drugs, because we have receptors that bind the chemicals of the plant. That chemical receptor binding of various sorts, various cells, various chemicals, changes the function of the cells. And of course, if we find that change positive, we're prone to go back to that plant and try it again. And in fact, if we find that plant positive enough, we go back and pick and identify the best ones and plant the seeds from that. So that over human history, there has been a tendency to find the desirable plant, convert it to an agricultural product, make sure you have plenty of it, and spread it throughout the entire culture. But remember, the issue is the chemicals in the plant, or the chemical in the plant, that binds to the human cell and changes its function. I said I'd skip over 1,000 years. The study in pharmacology of plant chemicals is really only about 1.5 centuries old, and that's being generous. We analyzed morphine and coca in early parts of the 19th century. We had some idea of what the structure was like. But the study of the plant and its yield of the chemical and the application of those chemicals to biological substrates, either experimental or therapeutically, really only begins in the 1890s in the United States. The most important early plant yielding information to pharmacologists was the ephedrine plant, the ephedra species, called some parts of the western United States Mormon tea or Jerusalem tea. So the interest in early pharmacologists in the ephedrine plant led for them to study the structure of the chemicals from ephedrine and find out what they did to human cells. Okay, now I'm going to change and talk as an introduction about the opium plant. What's in the opium plant, which humans have been using for thousands and thousands of years? And of course, they used them for thousands and thousands of years before they knew what was in it. But I'll quickly skip ahead and tell you that the most important chemical in the opium plant is morphine. Morphine makes up approximately 10% of the weight of the opium plant, maybe 15% in some extraordinary species. It came as no surprise to me when I looked in some old opium books to find out people extolling opium from certain places. The opium from Afghanistan was better than the opium from Egypt, which was better than the opium from Java. And people had really strong feelings about the kind of opium you should smoke. The reality is, probably though all that mattered was the amount of morphine in that particular plant. Now, does opium have other characteristics, other chemicals? It certainly does, and I want to mention only a few. It has some alkaloids, chemicals related to morphine. There's a little codeine in the plant, which doesn't matter very much because the morphine predominates. There's also a compound called thebaine, which is similar to morphine and can be used for the synthesis of other chemicals. So once pharmacologists and chemists elucidated what was in the plant, they could manipulate what they found and make other chemicals. The first semi-synthetic chemical was heroin. Heroin is made by a simple chemical treatment of morphine. We use thebaine and codeine to synthesize such things as oxycodone, Percodan, hydromorphone, hydrocodone. So we have a large number of chemicals which are fairly valuable, which we've made by looking carefully at the structure of the plant and manipulating the chemicals that are in there. There are some other chemicals in the opium plant which don't matter. Interestingly enough, there's one other therapeutically important chemical in the opium plant, which has nothing at all to do with a sedative narcotic property. And that's a funny drug called papaverine, which happens to be in the opium plant. But searching the opium plant led to other kinds of therapeutic issues. So now, let me quickly say to you, there are 4 kinds of chemicals that bind to the opium receptor, to the opiate receptor in humans. One is, of course, morphine and the other constituents of the plant, codeine, morphine and codeine. Secondly, there are the semi-synthetic chemicals, which we make from things in the plant. They bind to the receptor, and that's oxycodone and hydromorphone, the stuff that's in Vicodin, hydrocodone. Now, once pharmacologists and chemists learned about the constituents of the plant, what could they do? They could synthesize other chemicals. So we have a group of chemicals which are useful in the treatment of pain and other conditions, which we made with the lesson of the structure of morphine. What are those chemicals? Methadone, propoxyphene or Darvon, fentanyl. These are chemicals which bind to the opiate receptor and cause important changes, even though they may not bear much resemblance to morphine, but they bind to the opiate receptor. Now, there's a fourth kind of chemical that binds to the opiate receptor. I mentioned what's in the plant. I mentioned semi-synthetic products. I mentioned completely synthetic products. The other kind of chemical that binds to the opium receptor is made, strangely enough, by the mammalian brain. So that receptor was not put there by God or whoever to bind to chemicals in the wild. It was put there to bind with chemicals that we made. We make morphine-like compounds on our brain, which bind to the opioid receptor, endorphin, encephalin, dynorphin. These are compounds that are part of our normal physiology and explain the presence of the structure, of the opiate structure. Now, with whatever time I have left.
You have about 7 minutes.
Oh, excellent. 7 whole minutes. God almighty. Let me tell you a joke. No, I won't. Let me switch to talking about the plant which in fact brings us here today. Now, for a long time, all over the world, thousands of years, people have been ingesting the cannabis plant, products of the cannabis plant. They sometimes made beverages. They sometimes made preparations difficult to make by scraping the resin off. They'd sometimes smoke the leaves. They did a variety of things for thousands and thousands of years. Now, of course, the process that I described, people becoming interested in the chemistry, pharmacologists becoming interested in the structure of chemicals that were found, the manipulation of those structures, the finding that those structures bound to receptors in the brain, and the finding that we make something that binds to those receptors as well. There are endocannabinoids, the same 4 that I talked about with opium. Now, the cannabis plant is it's a synthesizing machine. There are probably more than 60 cannabinoids in the plant if you analyze them carefully. There are also a few cannabinoids that only exist after they've passed through the mammalian liver. There are a few cannabinoids that we make that are not found in nature, and some of them actually even work. But by and large, most of the activity of the plant is attributable to a single chemical, delta-9 THC or THC. There are other chemicals in the plant that have some activity, but again, their concentration is so low that we assume most of the activity is generated by the delta-9 THC. Now, the process I talked about before, can we make chemicals that resemble delta-9 THC and see if they're better, easier absorbed, work at lower doses, work at higher doses, can be delivered in some other fashion? Well, of course we can. In fact, some of the first experiments ever done were on an unusual compound called synhexyl, which is probably a semi-synthetic cannabinoid. That's back in the 60s and 70s. Then I want to talk just for a short time about an interesting compound. People knowing this history, knowing that people love to use the cannabinoid plant, began focusing on the history, and Dr. Meshulam is the most important person to identify THC and the other cannabinoids. Then in the 1970s and early 80s, a drug company in the United States named Eli Lilly began to work very hard to make a synthetic cannabinoid that would bind to the receptor and cause some of the positive effects of the plant. It's interesting, you should know that in the 70s, people at Eli Lilly were well aware of the reputation of THC or raw cannabis to decrease nausea and vomiting, to change appetitive behavior, a variety of other things. So in 1985, the United States government approved the marketing of a synthetic compound called nabilone. You've heard of nabilone. It was marketed in the United States in 1985. The most interesting thing was, very illustrative, Eli Lilly gave up on the marketing of nabilone because our friends in the DEA insisted that nabilone only be marketed with the rigors of it being classified as a Schedule II drug, which meant the companies had to account for it. It means physicians had to account for its prescription. It means that it had to be held under lock and key. So the rigors of being a Schedule II drug caused Eli Lilly to say, screw this. And they quit. They withdrew the compound from the market in 1989. I tell you this point because it is an important illustrative of the fact that it's importantly illustrative that the DEA and our governmental foolishness gave people searching for other benefits of the cannabinoid the same kind of trouble they gave to farmers. In other words, we can't have cannabis because we're keeping that illegal, and we can't have nabalone because it needs to be classified as a Schedule II drug. Now, nabalone was then marketed in Canada by a company who bought it from Eli Lilly, and interestingly enough, in the year 2006, this company, the Valiant Company, applied for marketing in the United States again. So nabalone is now available in the United States again, sold as Sesamet. I don't think much of it is sold, but it works perfectly well. It binds to the cannabinoid receptor, decreases nausea, that's its main indication. Now, when one begins to work with the chemical in the plant, one can make many, many different versions of that plant. First of all, one can synthesize the plant, can synthesize the chemical. We synthesize the THC that's marketed in the United States as dronabinol or marinol. We've synthesized other cannabinoids. There's an interesting Pfizer compound called levonantradol, which appears to be an excellent pain reliever, but Pfizer's not interested in trying to move forward with the marketing because of the difficulty that occurs when you try to go against the DEA and the government by marketing a cannabinoid-like compound.
I want to thank you for watching again. We have John Cornett and Stash ready to close out on another song. Thank Andrea for coming on. And Andrea? Sorry. Andrea, I'm sorry. Sorry. And we'll be back next week to help us restore hemp.
This is a little song for our traveler that we talked to earlier. Only we're going to change it a little bit.
All right.
Oh, come on, baby, don't you want to go? Well, come on, baby, don't you want to go? Back to that brand new place, Sweet Bud, Colorado. Yeah, come on, baby, don't you want to go? Oh, come on, baby, don't you want to go? Oh, back to that brand new place, Sweet Bud, Colorado. One.
$4 o'clock news.